tens of millions of people have disappeared in the twinkling of an eye. There's chaos. There is, if you can imagine what's going on, I mean, think about the looting that goes on when something happens. I mean, there is chaos everywhere. And so I believe the world, and this is worldwide, I believe the world is going to be looking to some entity to explain all of this. Of course, Antichrist, anti is opposed, Christ is the Christ. And so the person who rises up is a false Christ. That's why he's depicted as a rider in a white horse, the first seal. And at first glance, you would think, well, he's on a white horse. This must be the Messiah.
Right.
And that's what people will think. He's going to appear on the scene. He's a man of peace. And he doesn't have to lift a finger to do it, no arrows in his bow. And we know he's going to broker a peace deal with Israel, according to the book of Daniel.
And what do you think about, let me ask you about that. What do you believe about that? What do you believe about this idea of a peace treaty? What do you think that's predicated upon?
Well, the book of Daniel talks about that, where he makes peace, for a 7-year peace treaty or a peace pact, which will allow them to worship just as they did before, whether it's a new temple or a new tabernacle. We do know now that all of the pieces that were in the tabernacle are already built. The outfits for the priests have already been put together there. The Temple Mount Faithful there in Jerusalem. And so all of that is ready. It just takes someone to give them permission. And so that's what the Antichrist will do.
Do you think that could come out of Ezekiel, out of the Ezekiel war? In other words, do you think Antichrist will broker that peace treaty? Because we know that out of that Israel, in other words, somewhere in that time period there's going to be a war, right? Somewhere in the beginning, when the church is raptured out, there's going to be a battle somewhere in there, isn't there? Or is it before the church, or is it after the church?
It will be, I believe, during this beginning of this tribulation period. The opposition will be neutralized somehow, some way, which will allow the Antichrist and to come up with this peace treaty for the Middle East.
And now you believe you believe the Antichrist then neutralizes that. In other words, the Antichrist is going to be the one that comes in, neutralizes the nations that are out of line. He'll get a confederacy out of those nations, and then he begins his rise to power. Do you believe, and this is just a theory, do you believe that maybe that's where the temple is allowed to be rebuilt? In other words, part of the peace negotiation that the Antichrist, because what better way to win Israel and the Jewish nation over than to say, hey, you guys can go ahead and build your temple again and worship there, right? Because he's going to reinstitute temple worship, right?
Exactly right. Now, whether that's a physical temple or if it's a tabernacle that's set up that they're able to do what they've always wanted to do, we don't know. I mean, there are several passages of Scripture that talk about rebuilding the tent of David. And so is it going to be similar to the tent that David had there in Jerusalem when he was king, where worship was going on and sacrifices were made? Or is it going to be a literal physical building? We don't know. But we do know that the Jews will then finally be allowed to worship as they haven't been able to worship since, when the temple was destroyed.
Right.
Back in 70 A.D. And so that will go a long way. I mean, look who has tried to broker a peace deal in the Middle East since 1948. Every president has.
Every president. It's amazing, right?
It has failed time and time again. Well, the Antichrist is going to come along and say, hey, listen, I am the one you need to look to. And so he will appear, and that's why he appears on the white horse. He's a man of peace. White stands for peace. And so he appears on the scene. Let me read this paragraph. John Phillips describes the Antichrist.
Sousa? John Philip Sousa?
No. Yeah, I'd be place. The Antichrist will be an attractive and charismatic figure, a genius, a demon-controlled, devil-taught charmer of man. He will have answers to the horrendous problems of mankind. He will be all things to all men, a political statement, a statesman, a social lion, a financial wizard, an intellectual giant, a religious deceiver, a masterful orator, a gifted organizer. He will be Satan's masterpiece of deception the world's Messiah. And with boldness and enthusiasm, the masses will follow him and really enthrone him in their hearts as the world's Savior and God. I thought that was a tremendous paragraph.
That is a tremendous paragraph, right? It kind of gives you the idea. And the things that we do know about the Antichrist, obviously, he's going to understand the socioeconomic, the political climate. He's going to understand the people that are involved. He'll certainly have a sense of, there will be something about him that's very intriguing, but I still believe, much like Judas, when Judas betrayed Christ, it wasn't until, Judas was a bad guy, right? We already know he was stealing from the coffers, but it wasn't until Satan entered Judas that he really became Judas, you know what I mean? And
exactly.
Antichrist is going to be the same way.
May have, good intentions of doing this. The world is looking for a leader today.
Absolutely.
We have presidential candidates that are going overseas and drawing crowds of 100,000 people. So the world is looking for someone to rise up.
That's a good point, Bud.
To lead them, and the goal of the Antichrist will be what? One world religion, one world government, one world economy, and we have that cry going out today.
Absolutely.
You see, the world is looking for someone to bring it all together, make it simple for us, instead of so difficult with all of these economies and all these different currencies. Well, let's just make it one. And so that's what the Antichrist will do.
But there's definitely, along with what you're saying, when Antichrist arises, there's definitely a sense of betrayal, isn't there? There's definitely going to be where everyone was thinking this guy, this charismatic leader who's made sense in the Middle East, where, like you said, since 48, when Israel becomes a nation again, and nations before that, by the way, trying to take this quandary, Vietnam times 10, and figuring it out, the warring factions that have been battling for thousands and thousands of years, since you had Ishmael and Isaac, all these things coming together, and he's going to broker this peace, and the world is really going to settle on that. Now, when does he betray the world? What's going to be the sign that Antichrist now has turned and become the fearsome beast that we think?
Well, as you follow the seal judgments, as each seal is broken off, a series of events occur. The first seal is peace. He's a world leader. Everybody loves him. Well, the second seal is war. Not everybody's going to be won over through peace, and so there may be limited warfare. The third seal is the rider on the black horse. Food will be scarce. Look at even today. I went to the supermarket this morning, and the whole counter for meat was gone.
Yeah.
And when there is some there, it's been inflated in price. And so the third seal will be control with famine and food. The fourth seal is disease and plagues. And, what is all of that? And so there's all sorts of explanations for that. There's one person who said, and if you'll let me just read this,
sure.
The beasts are closely linked with pestilence, and this might be a clue. The most destructive creature on earth as far as mankind is concerned is not the lion or the bear, but the rat. The rat is clever, adaptive, and destructive. If 95% of the rat population is exterminated in a given area, that rat population will replace itself within a year. It has killed more people than all the wars in history and makes its home wherever man is found. Rats carry as many as 35 diseases. Their fleas carry the bubonic plague, which killed a third of the population of Europe in the 14th century. The fleas also carry typhus, which in 4 centuries has killed an estimated 200 million people. Beasts, this author believes in this passage, are linked not only with pestilence, but with famine. Rats menace human food populations, supplies, which they both devour and contaminate.
I always thought we had to beware of Mickey and Minnie, and now I know for sure.
Now you know why.
I know why.
And it's interesting, this author mentions the plague. While the greater part of the city's population could be destroyed by an atomic bomb, the bacteria method might easily wipe out the entire population within a week. And this is apropos to what we're going through now.
Absolutely.
The virus causing parrot fever, one of the most deadly of human diseases, is appraised by scientists as being the most preferable for this purpose. While the cost of producing these bombs is comparatively cheap, its lethal potency is extremely high. According to Thomas R. Science, a science editor, less than 1 cubic centimeter of this virus is required to infect 20 million human beings when released in the air. And so we think about what's going on today. Look how quickly this virus and the panic as a result of this virus has spread literally worldwide. And so when we talk about famine and we talk about disease and plagues, you can see how quickly this would come about, and the fact that people would be looking for someone, some person, to give us an answer to this. And that's what we're kind of looking at today, is it not?
Yeah. I guess the best advice we can give to people is stop looking for the Antichrist and start looking for the real Christ, right? I mean, you better make sure you have your Christs in the right order, as it were, in that way. So then the climate of the world, when he comes on, and obviously he reveals himself 3.5 years in, he reveals who he really is. I tend to believe that's probably, could be when Satan enters him, whatever. Now he turns out to be this maniacal, crazy world leader. But also now, something that had been going on. Well, give me your thoughts on the one world religion, as it were. You know, we see now a one world leader who emerges, but what about the religion of the world? You know, we live in a time where we're seeing more and more and more of the melding down of the things that make us distinct from one another, like theology and doctrine and those types of things. You know, Buzzy, I remember back in the days when I was first saved, you know, that I remember when pastors would get up and name the workers of iniquity and darkness and say to you, these things are considered cults and you shouldn't be part of these. But today it seems like kumbaya, right? We're all trying to meld into this one conglomeration of this brotherhood or humanity. You know, God forbid you say brotherhood. So this human conglomeration of thought that we have to agree on everything, be just alike, and speak to the one world religion, if you would, for a little bit.
Well, obviously this is the Antichrist's goal: one world government, one world economy, and one world religion. I mean, how many times through the years have leaders used religion as a tool or as a means for warfare? Now, what you said earlier, and we'll go into this when we get into the trumpet judgments, when that warfare happens in heaven and Satan is finally cast out of heaven, I believe at that point he then inhabits the Antichrist. And what was Satan's goal all along? Satan's goal was to be what? To be above God.
Yeah, exactly.
To be more important, to be higher than the clouds. And so Satan's goal all along was to be worshipped above God. And so now he has that opportunity. He now inhabits the Antichrist. An image now is set up in that temple. The peace deal that was brokered by the Antichrist is now done away with, and that image is set up. Perhaps it's the image of Satan or the image of the Antichrist. They're two in one as of right now. And so they will demand then that the world worships him, which is Satan's goal all along. And so I'm sure that during that time, Satan's going to think, I finally attained it. You know, people are going to worship me. And so the Antichrist will use that tool. Satan will use that tool to garner the world unto himself.
Well, there's no doubt that religion is a binding factor among people. And what we're seeing in this sort of gray matter that's out there floating around, you know, I'm even watching it from people that used to be considered evangelical, who are, as Paul writes to Timothy, there will be a falling away, there will be an apostasy. And what we're seeing today are, you know, traditionally strong stance on the gospel. You know, you might disagree on some minor things, but for the most part, the gospel and the basic tenets everyone agreed on. But now you're starting to see where people are willing to compromise because of Mother Earth, or they're willing to compromise because of things like COVID, or they're willing to compromise for a lot of different reasons. And boy, I see a lot of it happening in religion. A lot of these televangelists and everyone else who used to at least stand somewhat strong in the gospel are just absolutely becoming anemic when it comes to these things, and we're valuing the worship experience, the music, the Christian concert. We value that much more than we do doctrine. And what I'm seeing are people that now, some people look at this and say, isn't that great? Isn't it wonderful? Everyone's just kind of coming together and we're all going to, but don't you, I believe that that's part of the movement towards a one world religion. You know, in the book of Revelation, and I think it's in 17, it talks about the harlot. And of course, the harlot will ride the beast. Well, that harlot is nothing more than the whatever religious proclivity is going to run all this. Now, I remember years ago it was going to be the Pope and all these other things. I'm not sure who is going to be running it, but we do know that there will be this call for all these different religious groups to come underneath this umbrella and to worship whatever muckety-muck they're going to worship. But it's interesting also because Antichrist is going to turn against that also one day, right?
He will. Yeah, he will. I mean, he will literally get rid of the economy. He will get rid of the religion. He'll do war against all of those. And those last 3.5 years, and I know we're not there yet, but you're going to have the wrath of Satan through the Antichrist being meted out against the believers and against the Jews, the Israel. And then at the same time, you're going to have the wrath of God being meted out to the unbelievers. And if you can imagine what the world is going to look like at that time, when you have the wrath of Satan and the wrath of God all happening at the same time.
Right.
You talk about a tribulation period, a great tribulation period. That's what it's going to be.
Yeah. Well, I just looked up there in Revelation 17 is where it is. If you want to read more about the idea, anybody out there want to read more about the one worldness of all this, and in one spot it tells us that all the peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues are going to worship at the altar of this false religious system. But man, do I see it coming together so quickly, where people are willing to drop they're willing to drop the Word of God. And that's the antidote to this, is to know the Word of God and to follow the Word of God. So anyway, let's get back over now if we can. I mean, we delved into the Antichrist there a little bit. Do you want to go in now, get back over to where we were originally, you know, talking about the vials and the seals?
It's so easy to get sidetracked.
Oh, Lord, there's so many. Yeah, Lord. Absolutely. What time are we sitting at, Alyssa?
33.
Oh, 33. Oh, you know what? Do you think this is the time then that we need to stop for today?
Commercial break?
Commercial break?
There were 2 videos right now.
We're at 2 videos right now. So why don't we stop now and then we'll pick up again. Buzzy, you'll come back, right?
Yeah, whenever you want. Man.
Well, no, we'll pick back up. So today is Thursday. So we have now the airing for today and tomorrow. We'll have those 2, and yeah, we'll clean up. Let's just clean up the seals. Anything else, Buzzy, in the seals that you want to attack here? Anything else? I'm not going to ask you anything else in the seals you want to club. That wouldn't be right. So we're not clubbing seals here. So anything?
Yeah. Let's finish out the seals when we get together, and then if we're following chronologically, then we'll need to get into. And we need to talk about who are these 144,000 people, and then we'll get into the trumpet judgments. And there's another event that we haven't talked about either, and that's the Bema Seat, which is going to be happening in
absolutely. See, there's so much, guys. So listen, as my dear friend is saying, there's just a lot here. And so, look, if you like these sort of informal, fireside, chatty kind of things, by all means, we want you to make sure you're telling other people, though, because there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be talked about that people really want to know answers. Like, where are we? What is going on? Can we have an idea of the season when Christ will return? Absolutely, we can know that. We can't tell you the date or anything, but we can tell you some other things. So I would encourage you, make sure you tune back in. This, what we just did today, is airing, of course, as you're watching it today, and also will be again on Friday. And Buzzy and I will get back together probably on Monday and record some more. So we're asking that you will, you'll tune in, tell others, and for these real-time special discussions, and I'm looking forward to those. So be looking for the one today and tomorrow. And so with that, I'm going to say peace out, and we will see you next time we're on. So today, tomorrow, okay? Be blessed.